Hello everyone and welcome to another video. You can decorate your paths with many different things, such as benches for the guests to sit on, bins for trash to go in, lamps to look pretty and more. These can really help improve your park a lot, so knowing how they exactly work is really useful. There are 6 different types of path ornaments: benches, bins, lamps, jumping fountains, queue line TVs and signs, and each of them has a different effect. In this video I will go over each of these 6 categories and explain exactly what they do and how guests interact with them. First though, we'll look at them a bit more generally. With the exception of signs, every ornament has to be placed on a path piece and you can only have 1 ornament per piece. If you do try to place one on an already occupied piece, then the new one will replace the old one. Even the jumping fountains, which are on the corners of the path instead of one of the edges, cannot be mixed with the others. Speaking of edges, for benches, bins, lamps and queue line TVs you get a different amount depending on how many free edges there are. If you use single wide paths, then this will usually be 2, 1 on either side. But this can be just 1 on a T-junction or 3 on a dead end. 4 and 0 are also possible, but you won't often see that in normal gameplay. To get 4 of an ornament you need a disconnected piece of path, and you can't even place them on a 4-way junction in order to get 0. You can place them on a T-junction and then add a path to reduce it to nothing. This is different from having nothing on the path tile, as they will return when there is space again. You can't place everything everywhere. Benches, for example, cannot be built on sloped paths, and neither can jumping fountains. Queue line TVs obviously can only be placed on queue line paths, but you may be surprised that you can also place lamps and signs on queue lines. Because guests are little bitches, they do sometimes get angry and destroy your stuff. If your paths are dirty with vomit or litter and the guest is unhappy, they may decide to karate chop the shit out of your stone bench and become a vandal in the process. Until they are cooled off and are no longer red in the face, they have super strength and can destroy nearly anything you place on the path. Security guards will prevent vandalism in a few tiles around them, but you're better off keeping your paths clean and preventing guests from becoming vandals in the first place. These broken path ornaments can only be repaired by you, the player, and will cost you the same as building a new one. Not everything can be vandalized though, and to help you keep track of the properties of the 6 types of path ornaments, I've created this handy table. Benches, bins and lamps are vandalizable. Bins, lamps, TVs and signs can be built on sloped paths, and lamps, TVs and signs can be built on queue lines. The lamp is the most flexible type, as it can be built on any piece of path and can be bent into a variety of neat shapes by pissed off guests. That was the general overview, so let's now get into the nitty-gritty details, starting with the bench. There are 6 different bench variants. The one on the left here is the default one that comes with the signs and items for footpaths theme, and the other ones are variants that come from other theming sets. Despite looking different, they can all seat 2 guests per bench, even the one that is actually 3 little stools. So, obviously guests use benches to sit on, but what exactly makes guests decide to sit on a bench and what effects does it have? There are 3 different conditions that cause guests to sit down. The first is the most obvious one, and that is being tired. If a guest has an energy value of 50 or less, then they will sit down to revitalize. Another reason can be that they are very nauseous. If their nausea value is 171 or higher, then they will also choose to sit down for a while. Lastly, guests will sit down to consume food. If they have a food or drink item and they're either fairly hungry or fairly unhappy, they will gladly sit down on a bench to eat or drink whatever they bought. It only checks for hunger, so a guest with just a drink on them will only sit down if they are also hungry and not just thirsty. Notice that I did not say that the guests will find or look for a bench. I only said that they will sit down. This is because guests don't have the ability to search for benches. If they come across a path tile with an unoccupied bench on it, they will sit down if one of the aforementioned conditions is true, but they won't actively look for them. If a bench is vandalized, guests cannot use them anymore, but if a bench gets vandalized while guests are sitting on it, they will stay seated. As funny as this is, you won't see this if you use RCT2, as their occupied benches can no longer get vandalized. There's a good reason that guests sit down when nauseous or tired, as when they are sat down their energy level goes up quickly and their nausea level goes down quickly. The higher energy allows guests to walk everywhere much quicker after they've stood up again, and it also prevents guests from leaving because their energy is too low. And the lower nausea in turn removes all the downsides of being nauseous. An obvious one is that guests that are sat down won't vomit all over the place, but nauseous guests also walk slower and will avoid more intense rides, so there's tons of benefits to providing sick guests with benches. However, guests sitting down to consume food doesn't actually have many benefits and can even be a negative thing. A guest can perfectly eat their food while walking around the park and it doesn't stop them from going on rides either. But if a guest instead sits down, they will go nowhere and won't stand up until their food is entirely finished. So, if you charge for the rides, you might want to avoid benches near food and drink stalls. Well, I say that, but that's only really if you're going for pure optimization. In normal gameplay, this doesn't really matter too much either way, and you should just do whatever you prefer. When guests sit down, there's a minimum amount of time they will stay seated for, which depends on their energy level. The lower their energy, the longer that minimum time is. This ranges from just a few seconds with maximum energy to a few minutes with the minimum possible energy. There is some randomness to when the timer counts down and also for how long it takes them to get up after the timer has finished. And it doesn't start counting down until after they have finished their food or drink. This very short minimum time of just a few seconds can lead to pretty funny moments, as when guests have maximum energy but also are very nauseous, they will sit down and get up very quickly but immediately sit down again because they're still nauseous. So to summarize, guests will sit on benches when they are tired, nauseous or have a food item, but they won't actively seek them out. While they are seated, their energy increases quickly and the nausea decreases quickly, and they sit down for longer if they are more tired. Those were the benches, so let's now move on to the bins. Just like for the bench, there is one standard variant that comes with the default theme, and this time there are 4 additional ones. These two all work the same, despite some of them being clearly bigger than others. Once guests have finished consuming a food or drink item, they will be left with some empty container. Well, not always, as these 14 food stalls don't generate any trash, but all the others, which includes all drink stalls, do. While the guests are walking around, they have a random chance to throw it on the ground every few seconds. But because guests are good little doggos, they will throw it in a bin instead if they can. This works the same as with benches. Guests will not search for a trash can, but if they come across one, they will use it. If all bins on a path tile are full, then the guests will simply ignore them. And if between the time they decide to use it and the time they arrive at the bin, which is a fraction of a second, someone else fills it up, they throw it on the ground instead. So it's a good idea to have enough handymen around to empty the bins when they're full. But how much fits into one of those bins anyway? This is a bit complicated, as there isn't a simple number that you can assign to this. Technically, a bin only has a capacity of 3 items, which seems ludicrously low, but the thing is, every item thrown into it only has a 1 in 8 chance of actually counting. In an older video on bins I said it's just 2 items instead of 3, but I got that wrong there because of an incorrect comment in the source code of RCT2. In reality it is 3. Because each item only has a 12.5% chance of counting, there is just a tiny 0.2% chance that the bin is full after 3 items. After 10 items, it's still only about 12%, and it isn't until 21 items that the chance is about 50% that the bin is full. Theoretically, it's even possible that the bin fits over 100 items, as the chance is only 99.98% that it will be full. Because all the bins on one path tile function independently, a tile with 2 bins will fit an average of 42 items of trash. Interesting fact, if you remove a bin by adding a path connection, the game will remember how full it was if that particular bin returns when there's space again. From bins we move on to lamps, and while both benches and bins are incredibly useful, lamps are completely useless. They do absolutely nothing except make the park look a bit nicer. This time there are 2 standard variants and 5 that come from different themes. Wait, that's not a lamp, that's a fire hydrant. It indeed is, but it still does the same thing. Nothing. RCT2 does have a day-night cycle that you can enable, and during the night lamps will produce light. This is still purely visual and has no effect on the gameplay, but it's a neat thing nonetheless. Unfortunately, this feature isn't being maintained anymore and it can be a bit buggy. After the completely uninteresting lamps, we arrive at something that's quite interesting again: jumping fountains. It's not their function that's interesting though, as they are nearly the same as lamps. They don't have much effect on gameplay. The only thing that they can do is make the guest think that the jumping fountains are nice, which gives the guests a little happiness boost. The fountains itself though are incredibly interesting. There are 2 variants, and this is the only ornament type that doesn't have a standard one that comes with the footpath items theme. The fountains are still incredibly common though, as they come from the extremely common water feature theming, so they kind of are the default variant. The other one is the snowball fountain, which comes from the snow and ice theming. So, you may have never thought about this, but there is a lot of difference in patterns that the fountains produce. If you place multiple fountains next to each other, they will cooperate and create some absolutely beautiful patterns. You get the best effect with this if you put down a big square of them on a plaza, but don't mix the 2 types as they don't work together. There are 8 possible different patterns, and here they are with descriptions taken straight from Chris Sawyer's website. Continuous chasers. A single water jet appears to chase in a straight line, changing direction only when it reaches the edge of the fountain area and then carries on in a different direction. Bouncing pairs. Pairs of water jets bounce back and forth along the sides of one square. Sprouting blooms. A single water jet starts a blooming sequence, sprouting jets in all 4 directions, which each then sprout 4 more jets when they land. Racing pairs. A pair of water jets race each other continuously in a straight line across a paved area. Splitting chasers. Single chaser jets travel in a straight line until they reach the edge of the paved area. They then split into a pair of chasers to travel around the edge of the area. Dopey jumpers. A single water jet jumps around randomly from one jet to another. Fast random chasers. Same as the previous, but the jets run faster, creating a continuous looking effect. And lastly, cyclic squares. The 4 water jets at the corners of a square all start at once, squirting in a clockwise direction to create a square pattern. These patterns don't occur randomly. They always follow each other up in the order that I mentioned them, and they last about a minute each. And to reduce the workload even more, the order happens simultaneously everywhere in the entire park. If you have 2 different patches of jumping fountains, they will always produce the same pattern at the same time. There's something really mesmerizing about these fountains, and I could probably look at them all day, but we do have to move on to Q-line TVs. These are unique among path ornaments, as they cannot be placed on normal path and instead only on Q-line path. However, this doesn't need to be on an actual working Q-line. You can also place them on Q-line path that is used as normal path, although they won't have any effect there. There is only one version, and it's the default one that comes with the signs and items for footpaths theme. TVs are used to prevent guests from getting unhappy while waiting in line. The first 50 seconds they will happily wait, but after that their happiness will slowly start decreasing, and if it becomes too low they may leave the line. Q-line TVs prevent this from happening, and they instead increase the happiness of the guest up to a value of 165, which is about 2/3 of the maximum of 255. Just like with benches and bins, TVs only work on the exact tile that the guests are on. If the line is moving at a decent rate, you might not need a TV on every tile, but if you're doing some weird challenge, as I tend to do, and you're trapping lots of guests in a queue line, you will need to fill every single tile with a TV, otherwise they will leave the line when they encounter the one tile without. And with that we have arrived at the final path ornament type, which is the sign. These work a bit differently, as you have to place them on an edge where the path connects to another tile instead of on the path tile itself. There's one default sign tile and there are 8 variants that come from different themes. Again, these all function the same, but the themed ones are a bit more expensive. This does come with the benefit that unlike the other ornaments, signs do give back some of their cost when you remove them. You can use a sign to display a message in a variety of colors. This is nice and great for things like entrances to different areas of the park, but ultimately it is useless for gameplay and does absolutely nothing other than entertain the player. The other functionality though is the most useful thing in this entire video, and that is the no entry button. By pressing this, the text on the banner will change to no entry in red, and the guests will never walk through this from the side that the text is on. You can use this to create one-way streets or block of exit paths and even trap guests. Staff will ignore these, so you don't have to worry that rides cannot be fixed anymore when you block off an exit path. A very well-known trick is to place a no entry sign in front of the park entrance, preventing guests from leaving. This can be useful if you need just a few more guests to beat the goal, but after a few minutes the guests that cannot find the park exit now will start to kill your park rating. The only exception to guests obeying no entry signs is if it is on the very end of a dead end. It has some effect and it causes guests to walk sideways for a bit, but something in the pathfinding algorithm causes guests to eventually ignore the sign and walk under it. And that were all the 6 types of path ornaments in Rollercoaster Tycoon 2. Benches are for eating food, recovering energy and lowering nausea, bins are for preventing litter, lamps are useless, jumping fountains are intricate, TVs keep guests in queue lines and signs help with crowd management. If you want to learn about how guest emotions work, click right here. Thank you all for watching and I will see you in the next video.